You're watching Africa Wrap here on Arise News, broadcasting to Africa, Europe, the United States and around the world. You can find out more about us online by visiting arise.tv. This is a programme dedicated to Africa. If it matters here, we'll be talking about it. If it matters there, we'll be talking about it right here, every night at 1800 GMT. What we're talking about right now is how to ensure Sub-Saharan Africa can maintain its agricultural output. Most people there remain dependent on subsistence farming, but the pressure on fertile land caused by rapid population growth and soil degradation has resulted in plunging crop yields. If current trends persist, USAID estimates that half the population will be undernourished by the end of this decade. But a new finance initiative started in Kenya hopes to reverse soil erosion. F3 Life provides small loans to farmers so they can buy equipment and fertiliser on condition that they take guided steps to conserve soil quality. Duncan Woodside has the story.
In the foothills of the Aberdares in Kenya, a new project is aiming to prevent soil erosion and increase crop yields. Farmers are being encouraged to dig out terraces on their land.
And this grassing helps to prevent soil from moving down. So any water that comes along this is held at the upper side of the grassing.
Samuel, one of the farmers involved in the scheme, estimates that it took him 2 weeks of intensive labour to create and bolster these terraces. But he thinks it's been well worthwhile.
It
takes quite a lot of work to build the terraces, but they bring benefits because initially there was a lot of soil erosion, but nowadays the terraces hold the soil firm, and we hope it will improve soil fertility.
Under the F3 Life scheme, farmers receive subsidised loans to buy fertiliser as a reward for preserving soil quality. So far, Samuel has borrowed just under €150.
Before, when I planted cabbages, they would disappear or get lost or damaged in the field. But now I've planted 2,000 heads of cabbage and have harvested 1,700 heads.
The United Nations estimates that soil erosion is costing Kenya just under $400 million every year.
Soil erosion is not only a problem because it washes away the soil, but it is indirectly affecting agricultural productivity. At the moment, we have 1.1 million people in Kenya who are food insecure. And this population is projected to grow. And as a result of this population increase, if agricultural productivity is going to be affected as a result of this soil erosion, then food insecurity will increase.
Cheap access to credit and fertiliser through the F3 Life scheme has so far benefited Samuel and about 50 other farmers. For many smallholders, not just in Kenya, but throughout Sub-Saharan Africa, access to such basic products remains closed, as does expertise on soil preservation. But that expertise could be vital in preserving the continent's agricultural productivity.
Let's get more on this with from Heidi Chow, whose knowledge of Africa's sustainability dovetails neatly with her work as campaign manager for London-based NGO World Development Movement. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Just watching that report there and looking at this from a European perspective, it surprises me that a society based on agriculture hasn't grasped basic concepts of fertilisation and just nurturing the thing that gives you your existence.
Yeah, I think that actually there is a lot of exciting initiatives that are going on across the continent of Africa. A lot of small-scale farmers are using techniques to manage the fertility of their soil. There are projects in, for example, northern Ethiopia in the Tigray region where farmers have used composting to really retain soil fertility, but also seeing increased yields through doing that. However, what's been happening over recent years is that agrochemical companies have been more and more looking towards Africa to expand their markets. And the problem with agrochemical usage is that it contributes to soil degradation. It has both environmental impacts as well as social impacts for small-scale farmers.
So these are agrochemicals used for what? For fertilizer?
Yeah, fertilizer and pesticides, kill pests in the soil as well. And the problem with using agrochemicals for small-scale farmers are, on a social point of view, it involves paying for these expensive packages year after year, whereas if they used organic methods, working with nature, they can actually create more sustainable livelihoods rather than being dependent on chemicals year after year. And of course, chemicals in the soil also have problems because they can lead to increased soil erosion, but also pesticides can be accumulated in the groundwater. There are also health impacts for those small-scale food producers who are spraying the chemicals onto the crops, and the health impacts are exacerbated for women, who are the ones who tend to be spraying the crops with chemicals but have less access to protective clothing.
Right. Okay. So in terms of what's going on there with the soil degradation then, is that down to, we heard talk in the report about erosion. Is it erosion? Is it over-farming? Is the soil just exhausted? What's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked about the use of agrochemicals, and actually.
So you put much of this down to the use of agrochemicals.
That's right. Yeah, and what's happened in recent years, like I said, agrochemical companies have been targeting Africa's small-scale farmers, and especially with the help of governments like the UK through their aid policies, they're actually working together with rich countries to introduce schemes like the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which is promoting widespread use of agrochemicals. And like I said, year after year, use of these chemicals affects the quality of the soil. So in addition to having those environmental impacts and leading to issues around soil erosion and affecting the groundwater, there's also the social issues about for health and for the dependency of small-scale farmers who, and then actually in that report talked about the debt that they're kind of incurring as a result of using these packages.
That's quite a charge that you're putting at the feet of these agrochemical companies. Is it your contention that had they not gone into Africa, then these problems would not be evident?
I mean, they're certainly exacerbating the problem, and I guess their approach to African markets is actually to create more and more widespread use of these chemicals rather than less of them. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there are lots of different examples across Africa of different ways to fertilise the soil that don't involve buying expensive packages of chemicals. So, for example, there's a tree called the Phytoherbia tree, which is in the Niger and in Malawi, which actually is like a fertiliser tree. So you plant this tree next to your crops, and it kind of naturally fertilises the soil.
Well, why don't people already know about this?
Yeah, I think because, as I mentioned, that I think there's been quite a strong reliance on chemical agriculture, industrial agriculture.
Yes, but before the agro companies came in, then presumably they were...
But I think, and I think over the years what's happened is there's been less and less support to develop the research and the sharing of knowledge of these kind of techniques. And so as support has kind of left these kind of sustainable agroecological techniques and more attention's been pushed down their chemical route, I think that's why we've seen kind of less support for farmers developing their own innovative organic solutions to the problems of soil.
And look at the bigger picture. So we've been talking about sort of small-scale farms.
Yeah, that's right.
The picture across Africa seems to be growing urbanisation, people moving away from the land into the cities. So how then, are these small-scale farms what will feed Africa, or do we need to move into the industrial sort of size of farming?
Yeah, so across Africa at the moment, about 70% of the continent is currently fed by small-scale food producers. And actually there are 33 million farms, family farms across Africa of less than 2 hectares. So actually the dominant food model actually in Africa is the small-scale food production.
But that must be changing as people leave the land and move to cities.
Certainly. I mean, that's a real challenge about urbanisation, but we're also seeing kind of urban growing schemes as well in countries across Africa. But I think the issue here is about understanding that actually industrial agriculture also creates a lot of problems in itself. And actually, for example, climate change, actually the industrial agriculture relies a lot on chemical inputs, and actually chemical inputs tend to be fossil fuel based. And they also involve producing lots of food, lots of one type of food for export. And again, there are climate change issues in terms of mechanisation on farms, machinery,
so you're not necessarily
costs,
talking about locally produced problems. You're talking about problems, I don't know, in a factory somewhere in Germany where they produce this stuff and then dump it.
And I'm talking more about plantations across Africa, which are producing a single crop.
I see.
That's what, so when you say, does Africa need to move towards more industrial agriculture to feed Africa? Actually, I'm saying there are industrial type of farming across Africa
already
that's being used to feed actually foreign markets. And there are problems associated with that for climate change, as I mentioned, but also problems for local communities because actually they need to use that land to grow food for consumption as opposed to.
But there's a tension, isn't there? That yes, they have to grow food to eat themselves, but they also have to generate money to buy stuff.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that what's happened over the last 30 years is a fallacy of seeing food as a commodity to make money, rather than seeing food as something for consumption and nutrition. So
stop selling food overseas.
Yeah. So for many years, for example, African countries were encouraged to grow export crops to make money, so they can then buy in the staple crops they need to eat. But what we saw in the global food crisis of 2008 was that the international price of basic commodities went soaring sky high, and actually a lot of countries couldn't afford to buy the staple crops they needed to eat, and they dedicated a lot of their land to selling these export crops. So I think the food crisis of 2008 really shows kind of the problems with this model of growing food as a commodity to make money and importing the food you need to eat.
So is there any sign of that changing?
So I think, a lot of the policies of Western governments, especially the UK government, for example, are pushing more and more towards this industrial model of agriculture. And one of the things that the World Development Movement that we're campaigning on is to kind of get the UK government to listen to small-scale farmers across Africa who are developing their own sustainable techniques to grow food for their local communities, for consumption, for nutrition, and instead of listening to big agrochemical companies who are basically interested in increasing market share rather than feeding people locally, creating sustainable techniques and sustainable livelihoods for small-scale farmers who are the main food producers in Africa.
Very interesting. Heidi Chow, thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well.